So many people coming. We're just getting the microphone sorted out. Can you hear at the back? Is that all clear? Yes. Johnny Good, do you want to say a word just to make sure that you're heard?
Hello, everybody.
Yes, Johnny Good.
I can hear myself.
That sounds good. So thank you very much for coming. We've got a couple of things. The Christmas card and pop-up sale, Saturday, 10 till 12:30. Where is it? Village Hall. And RNLI, I've got a RNLI dinner, which is Friday the 7th, here. It's an amazing menu. It's got everything. And it's 45 quid, and there are 10 spots left, and they've got the Morgan Evans auctioneer coming to do a talk, and that is on Friday, 6:30. 10 tickets left. Ali Hargreaves has the tickets. So green scarf for that next Friday. And welcome to Lord Biggar, who's come all the way up to talk to us. We're very grateful to you, and for David Lee Wilson, who's helped organise all this. Lord Biggar is a Scottish ethicist and theologian. He's a priest in the Church of England, member of the House of Lords since January, on the Conservative benches, formerly Regius Professor of Moral Philosophy at Oxford, and he's published loads of stuff. And the publishers didn't send the books, he was hoping they would, but you can negotiate with me for these 2 copies. Well, I can have an auction at the end.
And I'll sign them to make it worth a bit more.
Yeah, there we go. Good. So one's on colonialism and one's on reparations and the moral thinking behind all that. But talking tonight about national identity, nationalism and history. Over to you.
Thanks, Owen. I'm going to stand up just so everybody can see me and I can see you. Thanks again for the invitation to come and speak. David Lee Wilson is an old school friend of mine. I think my wife and I last visited about 18 years ago, so it was time we came back to Anglesey, even in October. So good to be back. So I'm going to talk about 4 things in the next 30 minutes, and then you get to tell me what you think. Nations, national identity, nationalism, and history. That should fill 30 minutes, I think. Now, what I was going to risk doing right at the beginning was to get some audience participation. I was going to look at point it randomly at 2 or 3 people and ask you, which nation do you belong to? Okay, a hand up. Is that okay? One hand up there. So, which nation do you belong to?
I was born in Northern Rhodesia.
Okay, so are you Rhodesian?
I don't really know what I am.
Okay, there's a confused soul. Actually, lots of us are confused. So, my wife Ginny is sitting there. She is a U.S. citizen, but she's lived in the United Kingdom for 40 years. What is she? Sir, if you were asked, what are you in terms of nationality, what would you say? Cypriot. Okay. Do you live in Cyprus?
No, I was raised there.
Okay. And you speak Greek? Okay. But you live where now?
Wales.
You live Wales. Are you Welsh?
1/4.
Okay, you're a bit Welsh. Are you British?
My mother's British.
Are you British? Okay. Yeah, sir.
Nigel, I cancelled my Daily Telegraph subscription and I was born in Lancashire.
Right. English. You're English.
I construe myself as English.
Fine. Okay. I guess what I wanted to elicit from that is that what a nation is and what you belong to is quite a fluid thing. It's not quite clear, and most of us are. Some people have a very different idea. I'm this and not that. Some people, many more people say, well, I'm a bit of this, but I'm mostly that. And the reasons for what you choose to identify yourself with will be quite various. So let me just start off thinking a bit about what a nation is and what the word nation refers to. And I'll do it in relation to the word race. Because if you're not sure what a nation is, once you wonder about what a race is, you become even more confused. So in around 1900, there was a prominent British imperialist called Alfred Milner. And if you read Alfred Milner, I'm quite a fan of his. If you read him, you will often find him referring to the British race. The British race, which makes some people nervous. Because is this racist? Is this white supremacist? No, I don't think that's what he meant. I think what he meant partly people of British stock who weren't actually resident in Britain. In his own mind, I think the British nation were people resident in Britain. The British race were Britons who had gone to Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and all over the world. So race just referred to as it were, the British nation abroad. But in South Africa, around that time, if you read people talking about the race question in South Africa around 1900 was nothing to do with blacks and whites, nothing to do with Europeans and Africans. It was Dutch and English. That was the race question. But then the word race there really means the same as what we'd mean by nation, the English and Dutch nations, or the Afrikaner nations. So what these words mean is really quite fluid. It depends on the context. Thinking about it, I think it's helpful to distinguish between talking about nation in a cultural sense and talking about it in a political sense. You will find in times past talk and writing about the German nation, meaning everybody who speaks German. But the German nation, up until about 1860s, comprised about 30 or 40 different states in what's now Germany. The German nation included people living in Austria. After the First World War, Austria, Czechoslovakia. So the German nation, culturally understood in terms of language and literature, was not confined to any one state. And that was, some people thought that was a problem. Some people thought that all ethnic Germans, linguistic Germans, should be part of the same state, which was one of the justifications for Hitler's expansion, to reintegrate the German people in a German nation state. But the word nation can refer to a cultural entity, a linguistic entity, and also it can refer to a religious entity. I was reading on the train up to Biggar yesterday a book about the disintegration of British India. I did not know until yesterday that British India stretched from Aden and the Gulf states to Burma until it was disintegrated before and after the Second World War. And so in the 1920s and 30s, there were many Burmese people who thought that they were Indian. When the question of whether Burma should become separate from British India, many Burmese protested and wanted to remain part of India, but it was Mahatma Gandhi whose conception of India was to be based on ancient Hindu civilization that thought that Burma should be separate because it wasn't properly Indian, it wasn't Hindu. So in Gandhi's mind, you had a conception of the Indian nation that was Hindu, so based on a religious or civilizational category. But the Burmese thought they were Indian. So you can think of nation in a cultural sense, in terms of language, in terms of literature, in terms of religion. And one of the main points here is that not all nations are contained within a single state, and you can belong to a cultural nation without being, as a nation, politically independent. And so I suppose if you're here in Wales and you conceive of yourself as being Welsh and you speak Welsh language and you value Welsh culture, yes, you're part of Wales, but you're also a part of a larger unit called the United Kingdom. Even though Wales has a devolved parliament, has a measure of autonomy, it is not simply independent. It is a limited autonomy. So cultural nationality and political autonomy are different things. They can be the same, but they're not necessarily the same. The other thing about the cultural nation is that you can have a revival of a nation's culture without having independence. So the great revival of Celtic or Irish culture took place in Ireland in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when Ireland was part of the United Kingdom. And although I am, as Owen said, partly Scots, I've not lived in Scotland for a long, long time. And I gather that Scotland has enjoyed something of a renaissance of Scottish culture in recent decades, but as part of the United Kingdom. So cultural renaissance doesn't require political independence. But yes, there is such a thing as a political nation, and I was wondering about how to describe that to you, or define it to you, and it seems to me that a political nation comprises everyone subject to a single political and legal authority. Whatever your allegiance or your nationality in terms of culture here in Anglesey, you are, as a matter of fact, a member of the British culture, the British political nation. And the question of how far a political nation has to share the same cultural identity is a major question. We tend to think that multiculturalism within a nation is a good and healthy and valuable thing, and in some ways it is, although, of course, the issue of mass immigration, uncontrolled immigration, has raised questions about the extent of multiculturalism and the question of whether, to what extent that is compatible with national cohesion. That's an issue. We tend to think of multiculturalism as a positive thing, although I've noticed that one of the most common criticisms of the legacy of European colonialism in Africa was that the drawing of borders around new nation states that divided, as it were, cultural nations. So you end up with people speaking the same African language divided between two countries. And the criticism implies that actually what should have happened is the borders should have contained one, as it were, African people with one language and one culture, which has the advantage of avoiding friction between two cultures within one nation, within one political nation. On the other hand, we do tend to regard that as that kind of mono-ethnic nation as problematic. But the question of to what extent a political nation can contain a variety of cultures is a very live one. The other thing about a political nation is that it doesn't have to involve, as it were, absolute sovereignty. So, in a sense, Wales is a political nation. You have your own assembly, and the assembly has certain powers, but its powers are limited. in Scotland, when Scotland joined Great Britain, joined England in Great Britain in 1707. Yes, it lost its parliament, but it retained its own legal system, it retained its own education system, it retained its own church. So even though Scotland did become part of Great Britain, it did not lose all of its national institutions. It retained a certain political autonomy, but a limited autonomy. So a political nation doesn't have to have absolute autonomy, absolute sovereignty. It can have a certain level of it. And whether it should have more or less is, of course, often a live political question. And the same tension between, as it were, national sovereignty and the national sovereignty within a larger political body. The same tension was felt within the European Union, as it is between the constituent nations of the UK and Westminster. The tension between parts of the political nation wanting more control and the centre wanting more control. That's a very common tension within a political nation. Anyway, just to communicate that what a nation is not clear, but I think it's helpful to distinguish between a cultural nation and a political one, because they are not the same thing. Let me move on to national identity, identifying with a particular nation. I think in general it's good to do that, because it's good to identify with a people and take responsibility for it. Human lives are invariably shaped by nation states. When we belong to the European Union, our lives are also shaped by Brussels and by other parts of Europe. Your lives are shaped to some extent by Cardiff and the Senedd, but also shaped by Westminster. And it's insofar as our lives are shaped by nation states, it's important to take responsibility for them and care about them and try and improve them. And even though nowadays, since the Second World War, the United Nations is a fact of international life and there are international bodies, nation states remain the basic international agents. So the UN only has as much power as nation states give it. It has no troops of its own. So nation states, for better and for worse, shape our lives, and it's important to identify with them in the sense that you take responsibility for them. It doesn't mean you like everything about them. No one likes everything about any nation state, I doubt. But they do shape human lives, and those lives need to be shaped better than worse, so we need to take responsibility for them. Now, almost everybody in the world is born into a nation state. So in one sense, one's identity is given. I was born in Scotland as part of the United Kingdom, and that was given. My wife was born in Syracuse, New York. She was born into the United States. She is in the process of applying for UK citizenship. So she will choose to change her citizenship. So even though we're born into a nation state, we don't have to maintain our loyalty to that nation. We can choose another. And whenever we choose to belong to a nation state, or whenever we choose to maintain our loyalty to a nation state, we become accountable for it. We have to give a reason for it. And sometimes that's quite, when someone asks you, well, okay, so you identify yourself as Welsh, you identify yourself as British, why? Justify it. It's sometimes quite hard to do. I remember in the wake of the Brexit referendum, having an online discussion on Twitter with someone I'd known some decades before, and he was a passionate Europhile, and he was deeply, deeply upset about Brexit. And as you will probably know, Twitter's not the best place to have a conversation, particularly not one if you want to keep tempers down. But I kept pressing him, and I said, Paul, so belonging to the EU meant what to you? Why did it matter to you? Why did it matter? Why are you so strongly attached to the EU? And he got very annoyed, and he couldn't answer me. Now, I don't say that to suggest that his attachment was somehow inauthentic. It was very authentic, but quite hard to articulate. And in 2014, when Scotland had its referendum on independence, I, as an Anglo-Scot, born in Scotland, of an English mother and a Scottish father, educated in both Scotland and England, I was a natural Briton. If you call me English, I will say no, I'm Scottish. If you call me Scottish, I'll say no, I'm English. I'm both. Therefore, I'm British, which is a kind of a meta or transcendent identity. But as a Briton and attached to my British identity, the prospect of Scottish independence disturbed me, and I actually lost several nights' sleep over the prospect of having to call myself English. I joke. But the prospect of the disintegration of Britain, or the United Kingdom, disturbed me existentially. But therefore, I felt I needed to figure out, to articulate why. Why did I feel so attached to this thing called Britain? And I noticed that the campaign to keep Britain together, the Better Together campaign, was to me dismayingly inarticulate. The best it could do in trying to persuade the Scots not to go independent was to say, if you don't go independent, you'll be 500 quid better off. And I thought to myself, there has to be a better explanation for the UK than that. But that's when under pressure from the claims of Scottish nationalists, I felt the need to articulate and justify my deeply felt identification with Britain. Just so you know, I thought about it, and I came up with a number of reasons to justify my loyalty. One was negative. I thought the case in favour of Scottish independence just did not stack up. And I read a lot about it, thought a lot about it, and my pithy conclusion was that Scottish independence was a dogmatic solution in desperate search of an adequate problem. Right? So, not that Scotland doesn't have problems, certainly has problems, but the idea that independence was going to solve these problems seemed to me to be untrue. But that's the negative reason. The positive reasons for believing in Britain was, first of all, trying to justify or explain why you're attached to the UK is like trying to describe what's under your feet. So it's something we take entirely for granted. And one thing that I thought about in favour of the UK is that those of you who know history know that on these islands there used to be a lot of violence between English and Welsh and Scots. A lot of violence. And in spite of tensions and resentments, with the exception of Northern Ireland, we've got past that. And one argument in favour of the UK now is, do not assume we can't go back there. Because it struck me that if Scotland were to become independent, first of all, the terms of independence would not be entirely in the hands of Scottish nationalists. the nationalists would not get all they wanted, and they would resent it, and the English would come to resent the Scots in the way they hadn't done in 300 years. So to assume that the breakup of a country would be a smooth divorce would be very unwise. And to assume that it might not descend from resentment into violence is unwise. So don't take for granted the fact that the UK, notwithstanding all its imperfections and tensions, has in fact been an extraordinarily successful multinational state with 4 nations. Other reasons in favour of the UK were national security. If Scotland would have become independent, the security of the rest of the UK in the North Atlantic would become much more precarious, in the same way that Ireland's independence made Britain's security during the Second World War more precarious insofar as if the Irish had not granted us use of ports on their Atlantic side, it would have made fighting Nazis much more difficult. And then, yes, the fact is that although Britain no longer rules the waves, we remain an important pillar of the liberal democratic West at a time when, you may have noticed, very illiberal countries like Russia and China are in the ascendant, and this is a time for all liberal democratic states to remain strong and integrated, not disintegrated. So the then UK, during 2014, the UK ambassador to the UN, Mark Lyle Grant, observed how his Russian counterpart could barely contain his glee at the prospect of the disintegration of the UK. And Grant said that had the UK disintegrated in 2014, it would have damaged Britain far more than Brexit ever could. Britain remains an important part of the West, and the West is under threat. So let me go on to talk about nationalism. What is nationalism? Nationalism can be simply cultural. For a long, long time, Scottish nationalists were not campaigning for independence. They were campaigning, or they were standing up for Scottish culture and for a greater Scottish say in Britain and in the British Empire. So being concerned about your nation and its prominence and its rights doesn't necessarily mean you are separatist. Nationalism is often in reaction. It can be for something, but it's also in reaction against undue interference. Most people in the American colonies in the 1750s and 60s regarded themselves as British, but when they got annoyed at British taxes in the 1760s and 70s and the resistance of Westminster to their demands, and when they were annoyed at the fact that the British stationed 10,000 redcoats across the Appalachians to stop settlers invading Indian lands, they turned against London, and they began to identify themselves in opposition as American, not British. So often nationalism is in reaction against something, and a new national identity forms against something. So at the end of the 1770s, early 1780s, British colonists in the Americas identify themselves as American, not British. One of the happy effects of Donald Trump, there are some happy effects, is that his bullying of Canada suddenly revived a sense of Canadian self-respect and of Canadian patriotism. But again, there you have a revival of, if you like, Canadian nationalism as resistance to foreign interference or bullying. And that's so far, nothing I've said about nationalism do I regard as negative, but there are forms of nationalism that I think are unhealthy. And one is when nationalism becomes an expression of what I call performative victimhood, where it's mainly about resentment of the other. And I remember when I was a pre-teenager, I was at a prep school in Scotland in 1965, and there was a showing of a BBC docudrama called Culloden. This is about the last battle on British soil in 1746 between British Charlie and government troops near Inverness. And after this, seeing this docudrama, it's really remarkable because you have Gaelic-speaking Highlanders being interviewed by a BBC journalist in Gaelic with subtitles. After seeing this film, I remember dragging myself up the banisters of the stairs up to the first floor where my dormitory was, weeping, saying to myself, "Why do we, the Scots, always lose to the English?" I saw the film Culloden 20 years later. What the film makes absolutely clear, to anyone whose eyes have not been prejudiced, is that the Battle of Culloden was not between the English and the Scots. It was between Gaelic-speaking, Catholic, cattle-rustling, feudal Highlanders and government troops, most of which were lowland Scots in redcoats. My people wore redcoats. They were Protestant, lowland Scots, English-speaking, driving cattle back and forth across the English border. But at the age of 10, I had absorbed the kind of anti-English Scottish chippiness that made me misread history. I read in the story of Culloden what the, as it were, binary Manichaean opposition between English and Scots led me to expect to see, but actually it wasn't the truth. And that was clear to me when I saw the film later. So sometimes nationalism can be a vehicle for exaggerated and misplaced resentment, and that's not healthy at all. And now often nationalism is a vehicle for political frustrations. And it's not really, in a sense, about national independence. So one feature of the vote for the Scottish National Party, particularly in Glasgow, is its kind of volatility. So many of the voters who had started to vote for the SNP were former Labour voters. Many of them now shifted recently to Labour. Now they're shifting to Reform. These are voters who simply want things to change, and independence is not really the point. It's change they want. But nationalism for a while became a vehicle of this frustration. And the problem with that is that having allied their frustrations to a separatist political project, they could have ended up with independence that would have made their lives, in my view, worse. Okay, enough about nationalism. Finally, history. How much time do I have? I think I probably... I can, as they say, talk for England about this, but... I'll talk about a bit about history. I'll talk for another 5 or 7 minutes, promise. Okay, so what's history got to do with all this? Well, history is used for political purposes, and that's okay. I use it for political purposes, but sometimes history is abused and distorted for political purposes. So this is when I first became interested in the topic of colonialism, because in 2014, although I was a visceral Briton, and I was an opponent of independence, I felt morally obliged to consider nationalist arguments, because I don't believe nations are forever. They come and they go. The UK did not exist before 1801. The United States almost came apart in the 1860s during the Civil War, and Czechoslovakia did come apart in 1993. So nations are the creatures of history. They don't exist forever. And so, yes, it could be that the reasons for the UK had been exhausted and that we should disintegrate into smaller nations. So I took to reading nationalist arguments in favour of independence, and one argument I came across can be distilled into this equation. Britain equals empire equals evil. Therefore, Scotland should break off from this this poisoned post-imperial Britain and sail off into a bright new, shiny, sin-free future. But since I've been reading British imperial history for 30 years, I knew that the simple equation, empire equals evil, is not historically tenable. But then it was that I realized that history was being used and distorted to support a political project I regarded as misguided. So that's where history comes into play, and that's when I decided, well, I thought someone needs to correct the record in terms of Britain's imperial record and past. And eventually I came to write this book, Colonialism, that came out 2 years ago. Because I do think that Britain is an entity worth sustaining, and I don't think its imperial record is the litany of racism, oppression and exploitation that some say. Yes, it contained, it presided over some very bad things, and I can talk to you about those if you want. If you want a summary, you can buy the book or borrow it. Well, no, you should buy the book. And look on page 276, you'll find a summary of all the bad things the British Empire presided over. But then I put to you that there has been no 400-year-old state in the history of the world that hasn't contained bad things. That's nothing extraordinary. And then on page 277, there's a longer list of the good things that the British Empire achieved. Some of you may be saying to yourselves right now, well, like what? To which the answer is, well, two answers I'll give you. One is that the British were among the first peoples in the history of the world to abolish both slave trading and slavery, and the British then led the world in suppressing both from Brazil to New Zealand for 150 years at considerable cost in money and in lives. Secondly, between May 1940, when France fell, and June 1941, when Nazi Germany unwisely invaded Soviet Russia, the British Empire offered Nazi Germany the only military resistance, with the sole exception of Greece. If you find yourselves in Sicily, at the foot of Italy, and you're driving south of Mount Etna in the northeast corner, and you are driving from Regalbuto to Agira, eastwards, you'll see a cemetery on the left-hand side of a gentle slope. If you pull over, stop the car, get out, walk around the car, into the cemetery, you'll find yourself surrounded by young Canadians. These are Canadians killed in the early weeks of the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943. And if you walk among the headstones, you'll come across one dedicated to H.R. Anderson, aged 28, I think from Winnipeg, Canada, killed on the 18th of July 1943. And I noticed his headstone because it bears the striking epitaph, anti-fascist fighter. Now, Anderson was a volunteer because Canada did not have conscription then. So Anderson volunteered to cross the Atlantic and fight fascism. Who called him? The British Empire. So, my point is, empire equals evil does not equate. Empire is not simply evil, nor was the British Empire. But you know, if you listen to the decolonizers, if you listen to those who are clamoring for reparations, 18 trillion pounds worth, by the way, from Britain, that the story you will hear is empire equals evil. And my books are saying, yes, the British Empire contained evil, like any long-standing state. It also chalked up some extraordinary, heroic humanitarian achievements. Well, you know what I think now, so it's time for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Why don't you take a seat?
Good.
Yeah, great. So, thank you, thank you very much, and we'll get some questions going now. I'll just ask one question if I can right at the beginning. I mean, it seems to me that looking at those first three bits you were discussing, there are probably in this audience some British nationalists, maybe English nationalists who favour sharing sovereignty in the UK and the continued existence of the UK, but not the EU. And there'll be some Welsh nationalists who believe in sharing sovereignty in the EU, quite happy to join the EU, but don't want to share it in the UK. And then there may be even some internationalists in this audience who think it's good to be in the UK and the EU. I mean, they don't have a political party at the moment, but there are some people who think that the things you talked about, sharing sovereignty to reduce national violence, international violence, nations fighting each other, which happened in the UK and happened in the EU, 70 years of peace and prosperity, an unusually long period in Europe. And also that Britain leaving the EU was a major blow to European and Western security, which the Russians were very gleeful about, just as much as they would be if Scotland left the UK. So I'm just wondering whether there's any thread you can draw that is consistent between all the arguments that are in favour of the UK not being in favour of the EU as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the issues, the concerns are similar. And people come to different judgments as to where where the common good comes down, really. I mean, there's no doubt that Brexit caused damage. The question is whether it has also made possible certain benefits. I mean, so there are two main reasons that I can think of as being in favour of Brexit, and that is bringing government closer to the people who govern. So one of the problems with the EU was the way in which, notwithstanding the European Parliament, laws emanated from an unelected commission. And so there was a democratic argument in favour of withdrawing, and the other had to do with the control of migration. Now, so long as we were within the European Union, the free movement of people made it impossible to limit the number of Poles who came here. So Brexit gave us, in principle, the power to limit immigration, but then, of course, quite apart from illegal immigration, the Conservative government under Boris Johnson opened the gates to hundreds of thousands of people from outside the EU, so that wasn't used. But I mean, I think the issues are the same, but what's needed really is a careful calculation as to what the problems are and whether withdrawing from the UK or withdrawing from the EU is actually going to solve them. The danger is with certain kinds of nationalism, as I think Scottish nationalism has been, you have this dogmatic, and I remember Nicola Sturgeon using the word faith, this faith in independence as the solution. Well, it might be the solution, but don't assume that, because it may prove, be careful what you wish for. So I think what you need to be careful of in the case of in debates about these things is allowing nationalist or patriotic emotions and resentments to cloud your judgment as to what will be the effective solutions to actual problems.
Okay, thank you. And let's get some questions going. Yeah, there's one there. Can we get the microphone to you?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Sorry. There we go. If you can wait for the microphone, because we can record. By the way, I should just say, there's quite a good crowd here tonight. There are people here. If you're not on our mailing list, can you put your hand up? Is everyone on our mailing list? If not, could you give your email at the front, and then we'll be able to mail you what's coming up on future months. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. Can I ask you a question about? Is it right that you can call yourself a conservative peer? The reason I say that is the arguments that you put forward today or this evening, I regard as very well balanced. Arguments on both sides. My politics are such that I would call myself, instead of Labour, I'd call myself left of centre, rather than supporting one political party. Can I just ask, that as an academic, do you justify calling yourself belonging to one political party? Because when you think of one political party, you think of certain attitudes towards Europe, towards certain methodologies of government, if you like.
Yep. So for a long time, I remember I was challenged by a conservative friend to identify myself as a conservative about 9-10 years ago, and I said no, I don't want to, because whether I'm left wing or right wing, whether I'm conservative or liberal, depends first of all on who I'm talking to, and secondly what we're talking about. That's to say, I don't. You can't put me in a box, because my views will vary. And I used at that time I read both the Guardian and the Times. But things happened to me, and well, the way I put it is, on the colonial issue, I found myself the object of not just criticism but aggression from, what shall we say, the further left or the progressive left or the cultural left, and that made me identify more strongly with certain conservative positions. But the thing is, whether we're talking about religion or a political party or marriage, you don't like every bit of it. But there comes a point where you need to commit yourself. And whatever you commit yourself to, be it marriage or political party or religion, you do it because there are some things that this party believes in that you believe in too, lots of things that your party is committed to that you don't agree with. So yes, I decided to come off the fence and make a commitment. It doesn't mean that I agree with all my conservative colleagues. It doesn't necessarily mean I agree with all the Conservative Party's positions.
Are
but
you a paid member of the Conservative Party?
Having decided to become a Conservative peer, I thought I'd better join the party, yes. Doesn't cost very much.
Owen, who was next? Was it?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for a most interesting talk. Working? Oh, nice. When I first went to school in 1940, my atlas was very pink in all sorts of places, and we used to celebrate Empire Day with flag waving and marching and so forth. And as I grew older, looking at this atlas, I thought I was deeply suspicious of all these straight lines in Africa and elsewhere. And particularly as I grew older and read about the people who had been authorized to draw these straight lines. But speaking personally, I have always regarded myself as British rather than English or Welsh. I've always regarded myself as European rather than British. And I've always had a very international upbringing and working life. So where do you pigeonhole me?
Well, no, you're quite right. I mean, most of us have several layers of identity. Yes, but I'd still say that you know many of us will have international concerns, and we may be attached to international bodies. I still think the nation state shapes our lives and your life, and the British nation state more than anything else. So I would say that deserves, insofar as you remain a citizen, that deserves your primary attention. It doesn't mean you pay no attention to anything else. It just means that this is closest to you, this is what shapes your immediate life, and therefore I would encourage you to identify yourself as British primarily. Even when part of the EU, what happened in Westminster probably shaped more of your life than Brussels did. But it's your identity, you get to choose what you would want to call yourself. I'm just going to say standing so I can see everybody.
Okay.
Nigel, thank you for that very passionate talk. It was never very clear, typical newspaper, in the Telegraph yesterday, why you were barred from talking to the Irish school. Did you understand any of the explanations you were given about not being allowed to do so?
Give a bit of context on that for those who haven't read the article.
Yep, so last Tuesday night, I was in London preparing to fly to Dublin at 12 o'clock on Wednesday to give out prizes and give a speech at the High School Dublin, which is one of Ireland's, I think it's probably Ireland's premier, Republic of Ireland's premier Protestant school. It's a major secondary school. But at 10:18 p.m. I got an email from the headmaster saying he'd been instructed to cancel my visit. You ask about the explanation given me, none has been given me. What do I think happened? I think someone read the program for prize giving on the Monday or Tuesday and protested because of my views on colonialism, perhaps on reparations, and for whatever reason, the Board of Management, it wasn't the headmaster, the Board of Management decided that I was too risky. But so far they've given no explanation at all.
My go. Thanks for the talk. Great, Nigel. Lot to take in. You've told us what nationalism looks like, but I'm interested in actually what it is as a human condition. So, during the Rugby World Cup, I went to the pub to watch England play Namibia, and I went with all my pals, probably 50-50 Welsh and English pals. And strangely, all my Welsh friends knew all the words to the Namibian national anthem. All in good taste, and we're all pals. But something makes all my Welsh friends did not want the English to win the game. So that's
Yeah.
all good-natured, but that's just one example. And then you can go to another extreme where you might see an England football fan on an away game in somewhere, Bruges, shall we say, and with 3 lions tattooed on his bald head, and a no shirt. And what is nationalism? Because that's kind of a rather sinister side of nationalism, isn't it? But still, it's still nationalism, and then a state further than that is IS. IS is a caliphate, isn't it? I'm not sure what one of those is, but is that a race?
So IS, Islamic State, you mean?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
So there's a few things there.
Yeah. In terms of your Namibian supporting Welsh friends, yes, I mean you find the same in Scotland. I mean there's always a kind of soft banter about the Sassenach, even though my mother was English, which really irritated her. It is kind of joking, but it gets a bit wearing after a while sometimes. And the problem is, see, because Scotland, Wales and Ireland are small countries, next to a big one, England, the fact is, whether you're independent or not, the small guys resent their dependence on the big guy. And even though Ireland's independent, it doesn't take long for a kind of soft, a low-grade resentment to surface. And that's a fact of life. The small guys resent the fact the big guy is overshadowing them. And I don't know how you get past that. I think you just need to contain it. So as long as it stays at the level of supporting Namibia, that's okay. But we all need to contain our resentments and make sure that the danger is sometimes the English are scapegoated. And certainly that's the case in Scotland. I mean, the complaint of the Scots Nats is we don't have independence, therefore we can't rule ourselves properly. But the record of the nationalist government in Scotland of the last 15 years is appalling. They had powers and they squandered them. So, Westminster may be responsible for your woes, but don't use Westminster as a scapegoat or the English as a scapegoat. But yeah, as for, yes, I mean, no doubt nationalism can take toxic forms. I prefer to, I describe myself as a British patriot because nationalist connotes something toxic. Although I've observed, Irish nationalism, Scottish nationalism, and Welsh nationalism are often positive things. English nationalism, never. Why is that? I just leave that. I leave that as a question. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for a really interesting presentation. I want to pick up on a few things you said. I'm one of the few people in the room, I think, also with a Scottish father and a English mother. But unlike you, I was brought up in England, and I went to a school where my very Scottish surname meant that every time there was Macbeth or 39 Steps, Lorna had to come out with it. And you can hear my voice, so do not sound Scottish. Anyway,
No.
But it then puts upon you this, I'm different.
Yes.
So football, we know rugby and everything. I will support Scotland first.
Yes.
I will then support Wales, because I went to college in Cardiff. And just in terms of the sort of political background, I did vote Conservative in the first election that I was allowed to, but I was in Jim Callaghan's constituency, so people can forgive me for that. But I was also there for the Welsh independence election, and being so vehemently at the time pro-Scottish, thinking, yes, they should have independence. And lo and behold, the Welsh population didn't vote for independence at that point.
Right.
But older and wiser and having an international job and stuff, I thought we're only who we say we are by nature of where we're born, who we're born into, what religion we have. We don't have a choice as children. And I think Britain is quite unique as a powerful nation to be surrounded by the sea. It's pretty easy, apart from Ireland, to say where the border is. What do you do about Portugal and Spain? What do you do about France, et cetera, et cetera? So it would be bonkers, from my point of view, to say we're not allied to the rest of the UK in England or Wales. And therefore, to me, as Owen was alluding to, it's bonkers to say we're not allied to Europe.
No.
So
no.
I don't get. So again, I don't get this British versus Europe, and I don't get the. You know, I still, as I say, when it comes to football and so on, I will still support Scotland any time over England,
Yeah.
and it is a question of but I don't understand this. Why are we not internationalists? We've got one planet. We've all got an input into what's happening with global warming or whatever. So why is nationhood important? And the only thing really you can come down to is defence. And one of the problems that Scotland and Wales would have, Mark and I, our bucket list is to go around all of the inhabited British islands, and all of them have significant history related to World War II, where they've had people stationed there. And as you say, the Brits and colonials have put a lot into fighting, and it's really just warfare seems to drive why we're nationalists at all. That's my
Wow.
point.
Okay. Just a couple of comments. One is, you said, you're right. We don't have any choice about where we're born. We do have a choice when we grow up as to whether we support independence or not. Yeah, or we support the UK or not. So there comes a point where we do make choices, and we're responsible for having good reasons for those choices. As for secondly, there's no nation on earth, not even the US, that is entirely independent. All nations depend on other nations. All nations are somewhat constrained by international agreements, or international institutions, and the question of how much power should lie at the nation-state level, or at an international level, or a European Union level, that's all negotiable. It depends. The answer should depend on who's best placed to use that power well rather than better rather than worse. But I still think it's a fact, notwithstanding international institutions, notwithstanding international organizations like the EU, I still think nation states remain the most powerful determinants of the lives of human beings, and therefore, nation states on the international arena, they get to decide whether they make treaties or not. They get to decide whether they withdraw from treaties. So notwithstanding the importance of the international level, nation states are the main players.
Yep, there's a question here.
On this question of...
Quite close. You hold the mic close to your mouth. Yeah.
On the question of British Empire and colonialism, I agree with you that it's a very difficult question to answer yes or no. I've spent a lot of time working in ex-British colonies, Nigeria and Bangladesh, and you come up with some very good stories of people who like the British and what they did. There's two parts to my question. So it is a very difficult question to answer. There is no answer to it. But there is a legacy, lots of legacies of British colonialism are with us now and will go on into the future. Now, one of them is what's happening. I mean, this is Owen's expertise. What's just been happening in Pakistan. Now, the British divided up Pakistan and Afghanistan with the Durand Line. Now, there's a line in the north, a line in the... Pakistan is surrounded by British lines. Now, somebody's already mentioned lines on a map. Now, the fighting was between the PTT, which is the Pakistani Taliban, and the Afghanistan Taliban. And it's all about what the British did in demarking the different countries without any regard to reality on the ground. Now, Putin has also made the same excuse for going into Ukraine. He looks at history in the past when it was part of the Russian Empire, and he just nitpicks and chooses different parts. Now, there's lots of countries where the British Empire did put lines on the ground. Now, this is going to go on in the future for quite a long time. I have no idea how you come to any agreement between these countries, but it's one of the bad aspects of British colonialism. And no colonial empire has ever ended without a fight. Kenya, the French in Algeria, French Indochina. Now, for an empire never to end without a fight that does send a signal that perhaps people don't really like it very much.
Wow, lots of points there. In terms of drawing lines in the sand, I don't know enough about the detail. I have read recently someone who was saying actually the line drawing wasn't quite as arbitrary as is sometimes said, and that certainly British colonial officials often knew their territories quite closely. But I don't. I mean, I accept that some lines divided ethnic groups, and that meant that that may have helped to create ethnic tensions within new states. But as I say, the phenomenon of a state containing different ethnicities is not unusual, but for that to succeed you have to have a strong state. So if anything, the fault was you create states with multiple ethnicities, but you've got a weak state that can't control the tensions. On the other hand, did you really want Nigeria to dissolve into 200 countries? That's the question of whether the line should have been drawn otherwise depends what we're talking about. As for empires ending in violence, yes, clearly by the end, lots of people wanted the British to leave, and we did. Should we have left earlier than we did? There are some arguments now that we left too soon. Some say that we should have stayed longer in Africa for certain political institutions to be bedded down, but you don't get to, as a decision maker in political life, you don't get to choose when you have to make decisions. Britain at the end of the Second World War was financially exhausted. The idea of empires was highly unpopular with the United States of America, and there were nationalist movements wanting us to leave. So we did. But one consequence in India was partition and the gross violence then. Should we have stayed longer? I mean, these are difficult questions, but my view of empire, just to complete it, I said that, yes, the British Empire contained good and bad stuff. The next part of my argument is, no, there was nothing equivalent to Nazism in the British Empire, and you can say there was a progression in virtue, there were some serious humanitarian achievements, but yes, it had to end, because you can't have white men ruling non-white people forever, and so it had to dissolve, and in fact by 1917, after an attempt had been made to unify the British Empire with an imperial department in London after that had failed, it was recognised that the British Empire had to dissolve into, or relax into, a Commonwealth of Nations, and Jan Smuts invented the term the British Commonwealth of Nations in 1917. By 1930, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa and Canada were virtually independent, and India from 1919 was on the same track. So even then, after the First World War, it was recognised the empire had to relax into a voluntary association of independent states. But the process was delayed, and nationalist movements got frustrated, and there was violence, yes.
You mentioned the word patriotism. I'm sure you've heard one humorous definition of patriotism, that it's a group of like-minded people with a mistaken view of the past and hatred of their neighbours. I don't know how true that could be.
Well, that's not my idea of patriotism.
No.
Okay. You got a question? Yep.
Thank you, Nigel. That was great. I'm glad we invited you. Take you back right to the beginning. Can you tell me, am I Welsh? I'm entering my 50th year living here. I've hung a big Welsh flag from the flagpole. Yes, I don't speak Welsh yet. And I'm like you, I cry when Wales loses rugby to almost everybody. But at the same time, I'm offended by the English flag appearing on roundabouts and in people's windows. And that makes me uncomfortable about being any nationality. So, am I Welsh was my question.
So, David, are you offended by Welsh flags in Wales?
No, that's
Okay,
what upsets me.
it's a very interesting question. So, there's this question about why is Welsh nationalism good but English nationalism bad? I mean,
And you said that earlier.
Yeah, but it's
I
interesting.
don't have an answer.
It's interesting. Yeah, it may be that English nationalism tends to, well, it has connoted largely working class. I don't know, racist thuggery. That's what it connotes. I don't think it's fair to assume that the recent outbreak of English flag waving in response to the immigration problem is simply that, because I think there really is a problem with uncontrolled migration. But are you Welsh, David? Well, my view is, you and Alison, you've set that, you have established yourself here 50 years. What's more, you have contributed enormously to Anglesea's economy, employment, and whatever. You're committed to Anglesea. So it seems to me that, yes, you're committed to Wales, and therefore, in that sense, you're Welsh. You're also British, but you can also be Welsh. I'm British and I'm Scottish. So it should be that. That is what counts. You have committed yourself to the Welsh community, the Anglesey community. It shouldn't be a mark against you can't speak Welsh. Shouldn't be, because what matters really is your commitment. And Alison, I believe, has devoted some time to trying to learn Welsh. So there's commitment there. So it seems to me you should be counted as Welsh. Whether every Welsh person thinks of you as so, I can't possibly say. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm offended by flags, all flags, because everybody rallies round the flag, and my flag is far better than your flag. And if you don't like it, I'm going to come over there and I'll smash your face in. That's the attitude with flags.
Okay.
We're all very tribal. We want to move away from being tribal. And as Glenys said earlier, we should be, and not just Glenys, but Lorna, we need to be international. We're all on the one planet. Why are we fighting each other?
Yeah, again, I mean, my view is, yes, we should all have global concerns. I still think having international concerns shouldn't preclude you having a proper concern for your locality and for your own nation. I don't see those as exclusive. So patriotism doesn't have to be tribal. I'm a British patriot. I don't think I'm tribal about it. I'm married to an American. I speak German. I think caring about your community at all sorts of levels, local, provincial, national, is a good thing to do. It's not one or the other. And notwithstanding the fact that local attachments can become toxic, that's true, but they don't have to.
Okay, what I'm going to do, I think, because we're running a bit out of time, so I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions, and if you can sort of manage to answer all of them. Yes, first of all.
Right.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk.
Yeah.
I just wondered, what role do you think class plays in nationalism?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because that's a good question. I was thinking about that. Yes, I think it does play a role, and I think when you think of the English nationalist with the St George's flag, you are thinking of working class people, usually. And particularly when nationalism is heavily driven by resentment, it will often be class resentment. And my own experience in Scotland confirms that. So the nation or nationalism becomes another expression of class resentment. Is that what you meant? Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Sorry, I feel it's an undercurrent that's not really discussed in terms of how people are feeling, and that resentment that comes through.
Yeah. Although many, leaders of nationalist political parties will often be very middle class, but and I remember Alex Salmond in 2014. You were saying, Scottish nationalism has got beyond being Anglophobic. It's civic nationalism. And I thought to myself, well, maybe it is for you at your social level, but don't underestimate the amount of low-level resentment that is quite Anglophobic. But no, I think that's right. Because nationalism can become a vehicle for all sorts of desires and resentments.
Yeah.
Hi. I was born in England, grew up being told that I was British rather than English. I don't know if that's the experience of other English folk around.
Why were you told that?
Because it's what you put on your passport, and that's generally what you are.
Okay.
And in England, we generally accepted that, and the Union Jack was our flag. And I don't think it was until it was a World Cup probably around the 80s or maybe even the Euros in the 90s when the St George's flag suddenly appeared, and I barely knew what it was. Because the Union Jack was our flag, we were British. And I think the fact that, whereas I suspect that the experience in Wales and Scotland would be different to that, because I think there's a greater identification there with their own flag than there ever was in England when I was a kid. And as a result, it's been sort of purloined by other groups for political reasons.
Yep.
While we were basically not paying any attention to our flag because we were British.
Yep. But I think...
Anyone else agree?
I just wonder if that's because, if you're a small nation overshadowed by a big one, you feel the need to assert your difference because you're overshadowed. And there's always a sense among Scots that they weren't getting the kind of attention they deserved.
Sorry. And as a quick follow-up, we now have a situation where, because of this conflation within England of England and Britain, the UK, there's not much distinction in people's minds, and we now have separate governments, the Senate and the Scottish Parliament, but there is no English Parliament. There's only the British, the UK government.
Yeah.
And so people in England are, their only government is the UK government. So again, there's this vision of English people and the UK being the same thing. So perhaps there's an idea that the English think they're dominant as well because they are Britain.
Well, but the fact of the matter is that the English in numbers and also because of London are dominant and have been and will be. Yes, this conflation of English with British is a conflation that English people will make because many of them don't notice the Welsh or Scottish or Irish peripheries. Some of them just identify with London. So, and it's an irritation for those of us from the Celtic periphery because, no, I'm British, I'm not English, at least not simply English. But it's again, I think it's a function of difference in size and dominance. That the dominant people don't feel the need to assert their identity because they are dominant. Whereas with smaller peoples do feel the need to remind the big people that we're here, right? So I think it's, and I don't think independence will solve that actually. My wife and I spent 4 years living in Dublin, and we enjoyed it and enjoyed Irish people, but the resentments. Some of them justified, some of them not justified, hadn't gone away, and there are occasions when it comes to the surface again. And it's partly because, whatever you think of Brexit, Brexit does cause the Irish problems. Why? Because Ireland, even since independence, remains radically dependent on Britain, right? And so the idea of and Ireland only joined the EU because Britain did. The idea of there being, as it were, a trade barrier, or a barrier in terms of migration of people between the Republic and Britain would have done Ireland a lot of damage. But here's I noticed the swiftness with which Irish resentment of Brexit rose to almost Anglophobic levels. And I thought it was, you've been reminded again of the fact that in spite of being formally independent, you're actually radically dependent on the UK and you don't like it. But I guess I, as I've said several times, because of the difference in size, I don't see that nothing is going to change that geography. Yeah.
Okay, two more. There's yourself and then just to your right. Yeah. So let's hear both questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you very much indeed for a most interesting evening. Like many people here, I was born in England with a name like Bronwyn Evans. I was very happy when we moved to Wales. We lived in Wales for a number of years, and now we live in Cornwall, have done for over a decade.
Yeah.
If you think nationalism, I live amongst the Cornish is all I can say, because I've never come across a more strength.
Right.
But what I wanted to talk about was tribal, the tribes. I believe that we are all slightly tribal, but perhaps we're looking at tribal as a different word. I'm also know that I'm not the only teacher in this audience. And if you think about tribals and you think about uniforms and you think about children in uniforms, they fight not to wear a uniform, but then as soon as you let them free, weekends and holidays, then what do? They put on a uniform. So I invite you to think again about how tribal we actually are.
Good point.
As a lower level of what you then went on to talk about, which I support. Thank you very much.
That's really...
You're right.
Yes, okay.
Thank you for your
Can you put the microphone right by your mouth? Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you for your talk. Very interesting. You mentioned toxic nationalism and nationalism based on resentment and a false sense of victimhood. What really frightens me about the UK at the moment is the way this sort of nationalism is being fomented by the populist right, particularly Tommy Robinson, Nigel Farage, the growth of reform, and even the Labour Party, regrettably, is getting into this narrative of scapegoating refugees.
Yep.
The Tory party does that. And many of these refugees are fleeing conflicts, which are the legacy of British colonialism. And as a country, I think we should be welcoming and making refugees welcome, not making refugees feel at home, not scapegoating them for all the problems that our inept governments are unable to solve.
Yeah.
Thank you. Two different questions.
Yeah.
Okay with those?
So on our kind of natural tribal propensity, I agree with you. So I think we like to belong to groups, and we take part of the meaning of our lives from our belonging to groups, and we belong to groups because we think the group has something worth identifying with, and that's what I think is positive about tribal or national identity. What's important is to make sure that you identify with your group because of the good things it embodies, not because it's better than some other group. I mean, it may or may not be better than another group. So the issue is a kind of positive identification for the values that this group embodies, rather than, as it were, using the group as a means of gaining dominance of other groups, and the dominance is what gives you a sense of meaning. That's the problem. But tribal identity, or identifying with groups at all sorts of levels, is perfectly human and brings all sorts of good things. Groups of people create things that are valuable. But I guess a constant... I keep talking about resentment, so a constant task of all of us is... Sometimes our resentments are valid. There are sometimes the reasons we good reasons we resent things, but we have to keep it under control and make sure that if we direct it anywhere, it goes in the right place, and we don't scapegoat the wrong people. Yeah. As for the populist right, yes, there are reasons to be worried about that. Certainly Tommy Robinson. I agree with you about the need for us to be hospitable toward genuine refugees and asylum seekers, but I still think we can't have open borders. We have to control who comes here, and because bringing people from very, very, very foreign parts of the world into our society and integrating them successfully is not to be taken for granted. It needs work, it needs time. Large bodies of people coming from very foreign parts of the world can create real problems in certain communities. So the issue is not immigration, the issue is control of migration for the sake of social cohesion. That is a proper concern. But I agree with you that migrants should not be scapegoated.
And there we are. I'm going to call it. You've been talking a long time. We're very grateful to you. So thank you very much for such an interesting talk and lots and lots of questions, as you heard.
Yeah, thanks.
So we're very grateful.
You going to auction the books?
Yes. You can come and make me an offer. Yeah.